I'm going to take you on a trip with me today through time and through space. So, together we can explore ecological calendars as a means to guide our post industrial modern societies to more regenerative futures. We first go to the past, to my past. This is me in the seagrass fields off the coast of Makassar, earning my master's degree in marine ecology. And I was educated as a marine ecologist, and I was taught to understand the system by compartmentalizing, by putting things into neat categories and understanding the whole by studying its parts. But while I was there doing my transects underwater, one morning I was approached by a group of tiny squid, and they watched me intently, moving when I moved, and I felt like there was a connection between us. There was something in that encounter that I didn't find in my data, in my research report. Needless to say that this encounter didn't make it into my data, into my research report, because as a scientist, we are expected to remain objective at all cost and to remove ourselves from the ecosystems that we are studying. My career path meandered quite a bit since then. I started out as a marine ecologist, then I went into climate research, co-creating scenarios with researchers and policymakers. I founded an information design firm for 12 years, and then I became a futures ecologist, which is what I do now. I co-create future scenarios or futures ecologies with organizations from a relational worldview, so that organizations can create ultra long-term strategies. This diagram by Kekila Perrin explains my shift from your North American worldview to a more relational worldview and how that informs my work. So in modern Western societies, individualism is the highest good. We are all individuals, separate, dots in the world with our spaces, and we bump into other individuals, which can be other people or other organisms. And time and progress in this perspective is linear. How different is the relational worldview, which is rooted in many indigenous societies, where time is not just cyclical, but also place-based. So there's no absolute time. And although there are individuals, they are not completely apart. They're also not one, but they're connected, and everyone influences each other in this web. This changed worldview for me was fueled by an encounter I had in the autumn of 2020 with a native from Pongsono Tau, a small island off the coast of Taiwan. And this person explained his people's ecological calendar that helped them relate to the ecosystem, helped them coordinate their activities with other species, such as the flying fish that they were fishing for sustenance, but also timing of agriculture. And this exploration into this was the starting point for my exploration into ecological calendars, because I thought that this might be a good tool to help modern societies synchronize to their natural environment. So when you think calendar, you probably think of something that categorizes weeks or months, like our modern calendars, which are synchronized to universal standard time, fueling the notion of time, as these blocks of time that are finite. We can run out of time. And blocks of time like seasons. We have 4 seasons. When one ends, a new begins. And this is very much opposed to the more relational view of seasons that is embedded in ecological systems, where seasons are rhythms and they flow into each other. The thing is, with these modern calendars, these calculated calendars, is that they are very much ill-equipped to help us deal with the big problems in the world, such as climate change, resource exploitation, pollution. In fact, they may have aided with that. So I'm trying to understand if there's a different way of relating to time and to calendars and to our environments. And I focus on post-industrial modern societies because they have historically contributed the most to these problems in the world and are most in need of a different way to view society. In my studies into ecological calendars, I talked to wisdom keepers of indigenous societies, scholars. I did a lot of reading to create a framework for ecological calendars. I also collected seeds, which are projects in the present that are already here, that foreshadow this future society that could be built on ecological calendars. And I created a speculative scenario of the year 2100 in the area where I'm from, where I'm living, in Limburg, in the Netherlands, to sort of test and see what this future society ran by ecological calendars might look like. So, situating myself in ecological calendars, I'm a marine ecologist. I'm not a scholar of indigenous knowledge systems, but these conversations have inspired me to create this speculative scenario. One thing about future scenarios is that there's different ways to approach it. A very classical way is foresighting, where you are here now and you have a straight line into a projected future, and this projected future can be either right or wrong. It's about reducing uncertainty as much as possible. But speculative designers are not interested in predicting the future, and that is not my goal. It is my goal to show the full potential of possible futures. So in this way, it's advantageous to create futures that are as that maximize the difference to the present, to see what can be possible, and even create preferred futures and backcast to the present how we can reach these preferred futures instead of remaining stuck in the status quo. It's important hereby to realize that from this viewpoint, there's multiple possible futures, and the more perspectives you include, the more broader your bandwidth is. And the same with that there's multiple histories, that people from different societies have different ways of relating to their histories, and there's not one universal history for everyone. From my readings and conversations, I created a working framework for ecological calendars. So not to assume that this is the complete analysis of ecological calendars worldwide, but rather a way for me to understand what ecological calendars are and how we can apply them. A cyclical framework is a very important part of an ecological calendar. This is an image from the peoples of the Pamir Mountains, and they co-created with scientists a visual version of their ancient calendar, which is traditionally patterned or applied on the body, where the summer is in the head and the winter in the feet. And it's visualized in a circular way, reflecting the circular experience of time. And mapping into this calendar are specific cues, specific animals that appear in specific seasons. I also dove into my own indigenous history, which is arguably the Celtic Germanic tribes, which are the last to have some sort of an indigenous knowledge system based on trees and tree rites. And I found that their calendar had sort of two seasons that merged into each other, a dark and a light half, summer and winter. And that's how they sort of organized the year. Intimate knowledge of the local habitat is very important for the ecological calendar, because it means that you're based and place-based in your own ecosystem. And again, this is a representation of knowledge from the communities in the Pamir Mountains, where they have intimate knowledge of all the indicator species appearing in different seasons. In addition to knowledge, that's very cerebral, ecological calendars have an embodied awareness of the ecosystem and an experience of humans as a part of nature and not as separate from nature. Arturo Escobar says this very beautifully. He calls it sentipensamento, a way of knowing that does not separate thinking from feeling. So you can know something, but to also relate to it on an emotional level, it's a very important part of the ecological calendar, in my perspective. Intergenerational cooperation is very important, connecting the generations to ancestral knowledge, but also being a good ancestor to future generations. as exemplified by the popularized seventh generation principle, where decisions you make today, you should take into account the future generations as well. And finally, the sacred part, the cosmology and the spirituality, is a very important aspect as well, where it's not just a practical way to approach the ecosystem or the habitat, but also a sacred one. And it's understudied and undervalued. And again, for this part, because I wanted to position my future story in my own region, I went looking into like really deep ancestral spiritual practices. And I came to the tree cult of the ancient Germanic Celtic tribes and the holy trees that feature in there, and the aspect of humans relating to trees being like humans in their cosmologies. And we still see trickling down some aspects of this ancient tree cult through Christian practices, Catholic practices now, where people, for example, go to specific trees and hang cloths in there, fever trees, to ask the tree or the gods to get better. And then I went into 3 sectors to study them for seeds for current practices that foreshadow this future based on ecological calendars. And I looked at food, healthcare, and spatial planning, because these contain the 3 biggest challenges as mentioned by the Limburgian government for the future of my region. And for food systems, I found the notion of alternative food networks, where people, consumers, can directly buy from farms as opposed to farms, funneling their goods through aggregators and distributors and retailers before getting to consumers. So bringing consumers and farmers closer together. Also, the rise of biodynamic agriculture and eating according to the season are all things that point to either a more relational worldview or being more aware of rhythms and patterns in our own region. In healthcare, we see that in birth, there's more attention for physiological birth, for the importance of following a birthing person's own patterns, and instead of, restrictive protocols. At the same time, we see a lot of women in the Netherlands stopping with hormonal birth control and finding a need to sort of track their periods more closely, also to understand their rhythmic moods and health, and helping them understand how their bodies are rhythmically and not like static or the same all over the month. And then there's healing gardens. This one's from Ontario, Canada. These are gardens or green spaces near hospitals to help people who are either sick or people working in healthcare to relate to nature. And finally, in spatial planning, in the Netherlands, there's this movement of building with nature, using natural processes to build large infrastructural projects. Biomimicry and spatial planning is on the rise, using ideas or inspiration from natural processes to create regenerative environments. And service design is something that has great potential to visualize or support relations. So instead of creating a space where relations can take place, spaces are organized to facilitate or even carry these relationships. So now I have my ecological calendar, I have my seeds, the elements that I want to explore in a future scenario in the year 2100 in Limburg. Limburg is the southernmost province of the Netherlands. It's a curious province. It's where half my family is from. People from Limburg feel like they are Limburgians first and Dutch second, and they have their own language, and it's still spoken. And there's a river running through the landscape, the River Maas, that is called Mother Maas by the people. And this river was very polluted in the 70s, and the Maas Cleanup Act organizes volunteers every year to help clean up the river. And a spin-off of this group has petitioned for legal rights for the River Maas to make it a legal entity with a voice. And I took this idea of the river as a living entity as sort of the starting point for my speculative scenario. And I created a future story I created this speculative story about Maaskant, a future society, a floating village near the River Maas. And I want to read a little bit for you of this speculative scenario, of which you can read it in full when it's published in Time and Society, submitted now, and I hope it'll be published soon. And these are some images to go with it, created with AI. Cateau is up before her calendar has a chance to wake her, like every morning since the great floods of the early 2060s. The calendar calculates the optimal time for waking, referencing cycles and patterns important for Cato's profession as a potato farmer, such as the water levels in the soil of her tender crops, anticipated weather, the river water levels, and soil microbiome health. It's the year 2100, and nestled near the River Maas in Limburg floats a unique and resilient community, known as Maaskant. Close-knit communities like these emerged in the aftermath of the Great Floods, which had forced millions of Dutch climate refugees to migrate eastwards in search of safety and stability. Central to their way of life is a keen observance of nature's rhythms and cycles. Over the last decade, the River Maas evolved back to her former personality as a rain river, as maintenance of the dams and waterworks that kept an even water level throughout the year fell into disuse. The communities may have a pragmatic and typical Limburgian sober view of life. The connections they feel with their mother river, the trees and beasts of their land, are commemorated in songs in the old language, Limburgian, and songs of past years are sung on stage, together with the new songs. So this scenario and these images, they speak of a future, and it's not meant to be an accurate prediction of the future, but rather a starting point for a dialogue and an exploration. It raises probably as many questions as it answers. Like, do we really need a catastrophic event like the Great Floods I just described for people to change their ways? And what does such a calendar really look like? How does it work? All the details are not worked out. But it mainly asks of us, would we live in a world like that? And what would it be like? I hope you enjoyed your exploration with me, and I hope I got across some sense of the way I view the world and how I think we should relate to the futures that we are creating, quite literally and in story form. If there's any thoughts or questions you'd like to share, I'm very happy to answer them. Thank you.